The summer of 1984 was supposed to be a new beginning for Thomas Sanders and his 9-year-old daughter, Emily, after the tragic passing of his wife to cancer just a year prior. Thomas had decided that the two of them needed an escape, something to help heal, to bond, and to start fresh. He packed up their aging blue 1978 Chevy station wagon, marked their route on a paper map, and told friends they were heading west from Denver to the California coast. It was meant to be a father-daughter adventure, camping under stars, visiting roadside attractions, and collecting memories along the way. They left on July 3rd and were never seen again. The last confirmed sighting of the two was at a roadside diner just outside of Ely, Nevada. A waitress remembered Emily and excited, talking about seeing the ocean for the first time. Thomas had paid in cash and filled their thermos with coffee before stepping outside. According to the waitress, they weren't in a rush. They lingered for a few minutes near the car. Then, just like that, they were gone. No security cameras, no unusual activity. No other diners remembered anything strange. But that was the final point of contact. After that, the trail went completely cold, when they didn't arrive in California by the following week. Thomas's sister reported them missing. Police initially assumed car trouble or a minor delay, but as the days turned to weeks, and no sign of the station wagon appeared on any highway cameras, concern turned to panic. Search teams combed the surrounding desert highways. Planes were sent overhead to scan for tire tracks or broken-down vehicles. Nothing, not a single clue, as if father and daughter had simply vanished into the vast, unforgiving emptiness of the Nevada desert. Thomas was known to be cautious, especially after his wife's death. He never drove at night, carried spare gas, and always checked in with family. For him to disappear without so much as a call was completely out of character. Even more puzzling was the absence of the vehicle. A car that size, and that old, couldn't just vanish? There were no signs of an accident, no broken guardrails, no tire skid marks. Just silence, stretching for miles in every direction. Every possibility, breakdown, kidnapping, even intentional disappearance was investigated and ruled out. Piece by piece, by late August, the case was quietly moved to the cold files. Locals began spinning their own theories. Bandits on the highway, cult activity in the desert, or something even more sinister. But none of it brought Emily or Thomas back. The disappearance remained one of Nevada's most unsettling mysteries, and for the next 16 years, the name Sanders became a ghostly whisper along Route 50. A reminder that some road trips don't end the way they're meant to. From the moment Thomas and Emily Sanders were officially declared missing, a small task force was assembled in both Colorado and Nevada to trace their route. Investigators began with their last confirmed stop, the diner near Ely, Nevada. The waitress who spoke with them was interviewed multiple times. She remembered Emily, had a stuffed bear with her, a little gray one with a missing eye. She recalled Thomas being polite but looking a little tired, maybe even distracted. Other patrons that afternoon, however, couldn't remember the pair at all. Despite being the only concrete lead, this sighting gave investigators nothing substantial to act on. The station wagon's license plate was circulated across 5 states. Flyers with Emily's bright smile were taped on gas pumps, pinned to bulletin boards in motels, and broadcasted on local news. Truckers were questioned at checkpoints, desert trails were scanned, and maps were dissected for any possible detours the father could have taken, but it all led to dead ends. There were no credit card records. Thomas had paid everything in cash. No gas station receipts. No camping reservations. The man had left virtually no digital or paper trail, making it almost impossible to follow his path beyond that last diner, an abandoned vehicle matching the Sanders station wagon was reported a week later near a cliffside trail in Death Valley. A surge of hope lit through the family, but when authorities arrived, it was a different vehicle entirely, a stolen car from Arizona, stripped and dumped. Days later, a hiker in the Sierra Nevada mountains claimed to have seen a man and girl, matching the pair's description, walking a forest trail at dusk. Another potential lead, but by the time officers searched the area, there was no one there. Not a footprint, not a thread of clothing, just pine needles and wind. Friends and family back in Denver struggled with the absence of answers. Thomas's co-workers at the local hardware store said he'd been talking about the trip for months. His boss described him as dependable and loving, not the type to run off or vanish willingly. Emily's schoolteacher, Mrs. Harper, broke down in tears during her interview, saying Emily was one of the brightest, most curious kids she'd ever taught. There were no signs of abuse, no custody disputes, no debt, nothing that would suggest a motive for Thomas to disappear on purpose. And yet, that's exactly what it seemed like. With no vehicle, no bodies, and no forensic evidence of a crime, investigators were left with a haunting dilemma. How do two people, one of them a child, disappear off a known highway in broad daylight without a trace? In the months that followed, dozens of potential tips would come in, ranging from the sincere to the bizarre. Psychics claimed visions. One man swore he saw Emily in a Las Vegas casino lobby, holding hands with an older man. Each time, authorities followed up, and each time, it led to nothing. The road trip that was meant to bring a father and daughter closer had now become a riddle carved into the American desert. 6 long years had passed since Emily and Thomas vanished without a trace. The case had grown cold, buried beneath a stack of other unresolved files. The missing posters had yellowed, the public's attention faded, and the Sanders family had begun to lose hope. But everything changed on the night of October 17, 1990, when a strange phone call shattered the uneasy silence. Emily's aunt, May Sanders, who had never stopped believing her niece was alive, picked up the phone around 2:14 a.m. The line crackled, faint static, breathing, then a voice, barely above a whisper, "Aunt May. It's me, Emily." The line immediately went dead. May stood frozen in her kitchen, the phone still pressed to her ear. She knew that voice. She had helped raise Emily after her mother passed. The innocence in the tone, the way her name was said, it wasn't a prank, it was her. Shaking, May called the police, and an emergency trace was placed on the call. It had originated from a payphone outside a convenience store in Snowfield, Arizona, a dusty, isolated town sitting off a forgotten stretch of highway, nearly 800 miles from where Emily was last seen. Authorities rushed there within hours. By the time officers arrived at the store, there was no sign of a girl or anyone matching Emily's description. The store owner said he hadn't seen anyone unusual that night, but a clerk on the night shift vaguely remembered a man and a teenage girl entering to use the restroom around midnight. According to him, the girl seemed quiet and nervous, and the man had a beard and a limp. They didn't buy anything. They left quickly. The payphone outside had no security camera nearby, and no fingerprints were usable from the receiver. Just sun-faded plastic and dust. Local police and federal agents canvassed the surrounding area for days. Motels were checked, desert roads were patrolled, and missing persons bulletins were researched. A woman at a gas station 10 miles out of town said she thought she saw the same girl the following morning, sitting in the back seat of a beat-up green van with tinted windows. The driver paid in cash and wore sunglasses even though it was overcast. By the time authorities followed up, the van was gone. No license plate was recorded. It was as if the desert had swallowed them up again, just like it had in 1984. The Sanders case was officially reopened, but the phone call left investigators with more questions than answers. If that was really Emily, where had she been for 6 years? Why call in the middle of the night, and why only say those words before the line cut off? Was she trying to escape? Was she being watched? Was she even still alive now? A trace of hope had returned, but it was laced with dread. Somewhere out there, a girl may have been crying for help, and someone else might have been listening. As the years dragged on with no trace of Emily or Thomas Sanders, their story began to drift beyond news reports and police files, and into whispered conversations and shadowy corners of local folklore. Travelers along Route 50, also known as the loneliest road in America, began telling stories of strange sightings and unsettling encounters. Some said they saw a little girl in a torn sundress standing alone by the roadside near the Nevada border, vanishing the moment anyone stopped. Others claimed to have heard a child's laughter echoing through the desert at night, always just out of reach. Truckers and drifters passing through the Ely region started to swap tales about a man and a girl who lived off the grid, camping in the wilderness just out of view. A park ranger once reported seeing a campfire deep in the hills, too remote for any registered campers. When he returned the next morning, there was no sign anyone had ever been there, only ashes and a small, rusted teddy bear, half buried in sand. Some believed it was coincidence, others swore it was Emily's. As these tales spread, the line between truth and myth began to blur. A particularly disturbing rumor circulated around a hiking community in western Nevada. 2 backpackers in 1994 claimed they stumbled across an old blue station wagon deep in a ravine off a forgotten trail. nearly swallowed by nature. They didn't think much of it at the time. No cell service, and the vehicle looked like it had been there for decades. But when they returned, 2 days later, with a friend to show them, the car was gone. In its place, they found only 4 tire tracks leading back to the highway, and fresh ones, not buried under years of dust and sand. Locals started referring to the phantom vehicle as the ghost wagon. Some said it appeared only to those who were lost or alone, a cursed relic from a tragedy that refused to rest. Others believed the girl, Emily, had never died at all, and that she roamed the desert at night, trying to return home. A few conspiracy theorists even suggested Thomas had staged the whole thing, fleeing society to raise Emily in isolation. But those closest to him knew that theory didn't hold up. Thomas wasn't a survivalist. He was just a grieving father, trying to give his daughter a normal life as the story became legend. The Sanders case transformed into something more than just a mystery. It became a symbol of how the vastness of the American West could swallow people whole. Even the most seasoned investigators admitted there was something unsettling about how nothing could be found. Despite so many searches, over time, the official file grew thinner, while the whispers grew louder. Tourists began making stops near the diner in Ely, snapping photos of where the father and daughter were last seen, hoping for a glimpse of something, or someone, but all they ever found was emptiness and silence. In the summer of 2000, 16 years after the disappearance of Emily and Thomas Sanders, a quiet, sun-scorched junkyard just outside of Tonopah, Nevada, became the center of one of the most bizarre breaks in the case. The yard's owner, a reclusive man named Howard Kessler, had been clearing out old inventory from a neglected backlot area untouched in over a decade. Overgrown with weeds and nearly buried beneath rusted metal and discarded engine blocks, was a vehicle he didn't even remember towing in? It was barely recognizable, its blue paint eaten away by sun and sand, its tires melted into the dirt. The number on the rusted plate caught his eye. Kessler ran the digits through an old DMV system he still had access to. The result stopped him cold. 1978 Chevrolet station wagon, registered to Thomas Sanders. For a moment, he thought it had to be a mistake, but when he opened the trunk and saw a decaying teddy bear, small enough to belong to a child, he knew it wasn't. His hands shook as he called the sheriff's department. What followed was a whirlwind of sealed crime scene tape, news vans parked outside chain-link fences, and the return of an investigation long thought dead. Forensics teams carefully began their work. Despite years of exposure, the interior of the car held haunting traces of the past. In the backseat, faded children's books, a cracked Walkman, and a worn-out coloring book with Emily's name on the cover were discovered. On the floor lay an empty thermos, matching the one described by the diner waitress back in 1984. Dried blood was found beneath the driver's seat, though it was too degraded to immediately confirm whether it belonged to Thomas. There were no signs of a struggle, but also no trace of bodies. The vehicle had clearly been abandoned, but why here, in the middle of nowhere, and hidden so deliberately? More chilling was what they found in the glove compartment, a small roll of undeveloped film, preserved inside a Ziploc bag, along with a crumpled receipt from a hardware store dated August 1985, over a year after the Sanders vanished. Investigators rushed the film to be restored and developed, hopeful it might hold a clue. And it did. There were 8 photographs in total. Most showed desert landscapes, hills, rocky outcrops, cloudy skies. But one image made everyone freeze. It was a picture of Emily, older than she was in the missing posters, maybe 11 or 12. She stood alone in the desert, her face blank, her clothes worn and dirty. But it was what, or who stood just out of focus behind her that changed everything. In the blurred background of the final photo, a man could barely be made out. His face was obscured, but his posture was menacing, tall, slouched, holding something in his hand that looked like a shovel. His presence wasn't obvious at first glance, but once seen, it was impossible to unsee. There was something wrong about it, something deeply unsettling. The picture sparked panic and speculation among the agents on the case. Who took the photo? Was Emily trying to send a message? Was she being watched, or worse, forced to pose? The vehicle, long considered lost to time, had returned with secrets more terrifying than anyone expected, and still, no one knew where Emily was now. When investigators first opened the glove box of the long-lost Chevy station wagon, they expected old registration papers or perhaps scraps of maps, not something that would reignite a national mystery. Inside, among faded napkins, a cracked plastic pen, and a rusted flashlight, they discovered a sealed plastic bag containing a disposable Kodak camera. Still intact despite years of exposure to the harsh Nevada elements. It was protected inside a second layer of plastic, zip-tied shut. To the agents working the scene, this wasn't just odd, it felt intentional. Someone wanted this camera preserved. Someone wanted it to be found. The camera was rushed to a forensic photo lab in Las Vegas, where experts carefully extracted and processed the brittle film. Out of 24 possible exposures, only 8 photos had survived. The first few were relatively harmless: wide shots of desert terrain, dated motel rooms with wood paneling, blurry signs on empty roads. But even these gave hints of something disturbing. All the locations were unfamiliar and untraceable, as though taken in places meant to be forgotten. Then came the 6th image, a blurry shot of what looked like a makeshift campsite, surrounded by cacti and jagged rocks. A tarp, a bucket, a child's backpack. But it was the 7th photo that sent a chill through everyone in the room. In it, Emily Sanders stood in the center of the frame. She was older now, possibly 11 or 12, and she looked changed. Her once bright expression was gone, replaced by something hollow, as if all the joy had been drained from her. Her clothes were ragged, her hair longer and matted, and she had visible scratches on her arms. The background revealed a barren, dusty expanse, somewhere far from civilization. And behind her, almost camouflaged by the shadows, was the silhouette of a man. He was standing slightly back, but looming. One arm was extended, and in his hand was what appeared to be a shovel. The man's face was blurred, either due to motion or perhaps on purpose. But what caught everyone's attention was how Emily wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking slightly past it, as if someone else was there. Perhaps the one taking the photo. Was this a staged image? A cry for help? A trophy? The photo's angle was awkward, low to the ground, almost like it had been taken in secret, or perhaps dropped. Investigators pored over every inch of the picture, enhancing shadows, measuring the height of the figure, trying to determine his identity. There were no fingerprints on the camera itself. No notes, no GPS metadata. Just this single frame that captured a moment far more disturbing than anyone had imagined. And yet, it wasn't over. The 8th photo, believed to be the last one taken, was blank at first, just blackness, a void. But under infrared analysis, faint outlines emerged, possibly the inside of a tent or a room made of wood or canvas. What looked like Emily's face was barely visible in the bottom left corner, turned away, illuminated only by a sliver of light. Her mouth appeared open, perhaps mid-speech, or scream. There were shapes around her that analysts couldn't fully identify. One expert simply wrote in the margin of the report, "This image feels wrong." These final glimpses into Emily's world confirmed what many feared: she had survived the initial disappearance. But someone else had been with her. And whoever he was, he had kept her hidden from the world for far longer than anyone could have imagined. With the discovery of the photographs, especially the final 2, the FBI doubled their efforts. Facial recognition software failed to identify the man in the background due to the blurring. But investigators focused on something else: the receipt found alongside the camera. It was dated August 1985, over a year after Thomas and Emily vanished, and came from a small hardware store in a desert town called Pioche, Nevada. The store, long since closed, had only employed a few workers back in the 80s. Records were sparse. But one name stuck out: George Tilson, a drifter who had been fired for violent behavior just weeks after the receipt date. Further digging into Tilson's past unearthed a disturbing pattern. He had moved state to state throughout the late 70s and early 80s, often working under false names at truck stops, diners, and gas stations, including, chillingly, a confirmed employment record at the diner in Ely where Thomas and Emily were last seen. At the time, he was never a suspect. He had quit just days after their visit. No one noticed. No one reported it. But a former cook, now in his 70s, recalled him clearly. He was quiet, kept to himself, had a limp, bad temper, always stared too long at families traveling through. The FBI immediately ran Tilson's name through every available database. To their horror, they found that Tilson had already died in 1999, just 1 year before the Sanders car was discovered. He had been serving time in a Nevada state prison on unrelated assault charges and died of liver failure behind bars. During his arrest in the early 90s, no one had linked him to the Sanders case. He had used an alias. His record at the time didn't flag anything more than bar fights and transients. He was buried in an unmarked prison grave. And any secrets he carried seemed to have died with him. investigators turned to those who had known Tilson in the years after the Sanders vanished. A parole officer recalled him once mentioning a little helper who lived with him off the grid in the hills outside Piauch. When asked if it was a pet, Tilson allegedly smiled and said, "No, smarter than that, but quiet." At the time, the officer thought it was a bizarre joke. Now, those words took on a horrifying new meaning. Several survivalist neighbors remembered a girl, perhaps 10 or 11, seen briefly near his shack deep in the desert brush. She never spoke. She always looked down. No one thought to question it, despite intensive searches of the area where Tilson once lived. Nothing concrete was found. No remains, no clothing, no trace of Emily beyond the photos. Had she escaped? Had she been taken somewhere else before Tilson's arrest? Or had something happened to her out there, in those brutal, empty landscapes? Law enforcement couldn't answer. But one thing was now certain. Emily Sanders did not die in 1984. She lived for months, possibly years. After her father's disappearance, and the man in the shadows, the one holding the shovel, was no longer a phantom. He had a name, a face, and a past soaked in violence. Yet even with that revelation, the most agonizing question remained. Where was Emily now? To this day, Emily Sanders has never been found, despite fresh investigations, renewed media coverage, and countless tips from across the country. No confirmed sighting of her ever surfaced after the photos were uncovered. Some believe she may have escaped and started a new life under a different identity, choosing never to look back. Others fear she met her final fate in the remote, unforgiving wilderness, where she was last seen, buried somewhere no one will ever find her. Every year, on the anniversary of their disappearance, someone leaves a small teddy bear on the roadside near Ely, Nevada, the very place where the journey ended before it even truly began. Locals say it's a tribute. Others believe it's a message, a whisper from the past, refusing to be forgotten. What really happened during that road trip in 1984? How did a young girl survive in silence, hidden in plain sight? And most chilling of all, is it possible she's still out there? Sometimes, the scariest stories aren't found in horror movies, they're hidden in old photographs, buried cars, and unanswered phone calls, echoing from a life interrupted, and a truth that may never
If you
be
liked
fully
this video,
uncovered.
don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.